Imagine sitting across from me in a dimly lit room, the hum of the city, just a faint buzz outside the window. I'm leaning forward, my voice low, because what I'm about to tell you is something most people wouldn't survive, let alone talk about. This isn't just a story about money or power. It's about being thrown away like literal garbage by the people who were supposed to be my blood and then finding out that garbage is exactly where the real power is hidden. Before we dive into how I lost everything, and I mean everything down to my very breath, I want to ask you something. Have you ever looked into the eyes of the person who was supposed to love you most and realized they were just waiting for you to stop breathing? If you've ever felt like the black sheep or the one everyone gave up on, drop a comment below. I want to know I'm not the only one who's had to crawl out of the dark. And if you're ready to hear how a dead man built an empire, make sure you're subscribed. You're going to want to hear every second of this. The last thing I remember as Ethan wasn't a grand goodbye. It was the smell of wet asphalt and the taste of copper in my mouth. It was raining in Chicago, that cold, stinging rain that feels like needles. I was slumped against a dumpster in an alleyway 3 blocks from the penthouse I used to call home. My designer coat was gone, traded weeks ago for a fix that didn't even take the edge off anymore. My chest felt like it was being crushed by a hydraulic press. Every breath was a battle I was losing. And the worst part, I wasn't alone. A sleek black SUV pulled up to the mouth of the alley. The door opened and a pair of Italian leather shoes stepped out, carefully avoiding the puddles. It was Dominic, my older brother. Or at least the man I'd spent 24 years calling my brother. Behind him stood Vivian, my stepmother, looking like she was headed to a gala instead of a murder scene. I tried to reach out. I tried to say, "Help," but all that came out was a wet rattling sound. Vivian didn't look disgusted. She looked relieved. She checked her diamond-encrusted watch and sighed. "It's taking longer than the doctor said it would, Dominic. We have the board meeting at 9. Dominic didn't even have the decency to look away. He looked me right in the eyes that looked just like our father's, and smiled. It wasn't a villainous grin. It was the smile of a man who had finally finished a tedious chore. "You did this to yourself, Ethan," he whispered loud enough for me to hear over the rain. "The pills, the needles, everyone knows you were the problem child. We just gave you a little push to help you find your bottom. It's just business. Dad would have understood. You were a liability to the legacy." They had spent high years caring for me after my father died. They were the ones who suggested the special painkillers for my depression. They were the ones who made sure my glass was always full and my pocket was always stocked with things that made the world feel soft and blurred. I thought they were my safety net. In reality, they were the ones tightening the noose. I watched them get back into the car. The taillights faded into the gray mist of the city. I was 26 years old, the heir to a $3 billion real estate empire, and I was dying next to a pile of rotting trash. The darkness didn't come all at once. It was a slow fade. My heart gave one final violent kick against my ribs, and then silence. Absolute heavy silence. No white light, no angels. Just the feeling of being unplugged. Then came the jolt. It felt like being hit by a freight train. I gasped, my lungs burning as if I'd just inhaled liquid fire. I wasn't in the alley anymore. I wasn't cold. In fact, I was sweating. The air was thick with the smell of stale cigarettes, old grease, and something metallic. I opened my eyes and immediately squeezed them shut. The light was blinding. When I finally managed to squint, I didn't see the Chicago skyline. I saw a cracked, yellowed ceiling with a water stain that looked like a distorted map. I tried to sit up, but my body felt different, heavier, rougher. I looked down at my hands. These weren't the hands of a man who spent his days signing contracts and playing golf. These hands were calloused, the fingernails broken and stained with grime that seemed etched into the skin. I scrambled out of the sagging cot and found a shattered piece of mirror leaning against a stack of newspapers. The man staring back at me wasn't Ethan. He was older, maybe mid-30s, with a jagged scar running along his jawline and eyes that looked like they had seen 100 lifetimes of misery. This was Cole, a man who, according to the eviction notice on the floor, was a scrapper in North Philly who owed 3 months of rent for a room that wasn't fit for a dog. I collapsed back onto the bed, my head spinning. I remembered the rain. I remembered Dominic's shoes. I remembered dying. I started to shake, a panic attack clawing at my throat. I needed to get out. I needed air. I stumbled out of the room down a flight of creaking stairs and out onto the street. The sun was brutal. Everything felt too loud, too bright, too real. I wandered aimlessly for an hour, my mind a fractured mess until I tripped over a pile of junk left out on the curb for the morning trash collection. I reached out to steady myself, my hand landing on a rusted, dented metal box buried under some old clothes. And that's when it happened. The world didn't change, but my vision did. It was like a digital veil dropped over my eyes. The rusted box didn't just look like junk anymore. It started to glow with a soft, pulsing amber light. Letters, sharp and clear, floated in the air right next to it. Item 1920s, steel dispatch box. Status damaged / hidden compartment. Intact. Estimated value $850. I blinked hard, thinking I was having a stroke or a lingering hallucination from the drugs that killed Ethan. But the text stayed. I looked at a plastic chair next to it. Item mass-produced polymer chair. Value $0. I looked at a discarded glass bottle. Item common soda bottle. Value 5 cents. My heart started racing, but for the first time in years, it wasn't from fear or chemicals. It was from a realization so sharp it felt like a physical blow. Ethan was dead. The rich kid who had everything and lost it was gone. But Cole was alive. And Cole could see things that no one else in the world could. I looked back at the rusted box. $850. That was more money than I currently had in my pocket by exactly $850. I picked up the box, the heavy steel feeling solid and real in my grime-stained hands. I didn't know how I was back, and I didn't know why I had this sight. But as I looked down the street at the miles of trash, the mountains of discarded lives, and the endless junk of the city, I felt a cold, hard ember of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope, no. It was something much more dangerous than hope. It was the beginning of a plan for revenge. The weight of that steel box in my hands felt like the first solid thing I'd touched in a lifetime. It wasn't just metal, it was leverage. While the rest of the world saw a rusted relic headed for a landfill, I saw rent a hot meal and the first brick in a wall I was going to build around my enemies. I didn't head back to that suffocating, water-stained room. Instead, I walked until my boots felt like they were melting into the Philadelphia pavement, eventually stopping at a small, cluttered antique shop on the edge of the Fishtown neighborhood. The bell above the door gave a pathetic little jingle as I walked in. The air inside was thick with the scent of lemon polish and decay. An old man with spectacles thick as glass bottle looked up from a newspaper, his nose wrinkling the moment he caught a whiff of my scrapper scent. "We aren't buying any aluminum cans today, pal," he grunted, not even bothering to stand up. I didn't flinch. The old Ethan would have been mortified, blushing at the rejection. But Cole had died in the rain. This version of me just placed the dispatch box on the glass counter with a heavy thud. "I'm not selling cans," I said, my voice raspier than I remembered. "I'm selling a 1920s steel dispatch box with the original internal locking mechanism still functional. You and I both know what collectors pay for the untouched look." The man paused. He squinted at the box, then at me. He pulled a jeweler's loop from his pocket and spent 5 minutes poking at the hinges. I just stood there, watching the golden text hover near the box in my peripheral vision. Status authenticated, negotiation strength high. 200, he finally said, trying to keep his voice casual. I laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. 800, or I take it to the gallery 3 blocks up who actually knows their history. Don't play with me. I know exactly what's in your display case, and I know you've got a buyer looking for industrial-age storage. We settled on 650. It wasn't the full value, but it was enough to change my reality. As I walked out with a roll of 20s tucked into my grime-streaked jeans, I felt a strange surge of adrenaline. For the first time, I wasn't relying on a trust fund or a signature. I was using my brain and this strange, shimmering gift. I spent the next few weeks living like a ghost. I moved into a slightly less depressing studio, bought a used truck that sounded like a blender full of marbles, and started hitting every estate sale, flea market, and trash day in the tri-state area. I learned the rhythm of the discarded. I found a tarnished silver spoon in a box of plastic cutlery, value $120. I found an original hand-signed concert poster from the 60s hidden behind a cheap print of a sunset, value $210. But the real shift happened on a Tuesday at a government surplus auction. They were clearing out the contents of a defunct law firm that had been shuttered due to a massive embezzlement scandal. Most people were bidding on the computers in the office chairs. I was staring at a massive, oversized mahogany desk that looked like it belonged in a museum. It was scratched, one leg was shorter than the rest, and it smelled faintly of cigar smoke and failure. The crowd ignored it. But as I walked past, my vision flared a violent, brilliant gold. Item custom, 19th century executive desk. Feature double-bottom false drawer, unopened. Value priceless, contains legal documentation. My breath hitched. I bought the desk for $50. I had to hire 2 guys from the street just to help me haul it into the back of my truck. When I finally got it back to my warehouse space, I didn't go for the drawers everyone else had checked. I crawled underneath, feeling along the heavy wood until I found a tiny, almost invisible tension spring. Click. A thin tray slid out from the base of the desk. Inside sat a single wax-sealed envelope. No dust. No yellowing. Just crisp, heavy stationery with my father's personal seal. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought it would crack. I opened it with shaking fingers. It wasn't just a letter. It was the ghost will. The one my father told me about before he passed, the one that left the controlling shares of the corporation to me, not to the family estate. The one Dominic and Vivian claimed never existed. I sat there on the floor of a dirty warehouse surrounded by scrap metal and old tires holding the power to ruin their lives. I could see the faces of Dominic and Vivian in my mind, smiling as they watched me die. They thought they had buried the truth along with me. But as I looked at the legal seal, I realized that having the paper wasn't enough. If I walked into a police station now as Cole the Scrapper, they'd throw me in a psych ward. I needed to be more than a man with a secret. I needed to be a man with an empire that was too big to ignore. I looked around at my piles of trash. It was time to stop being a scavenger and start being a shark. The wax seal on that envelope felt like a piece of my old soul, smooth, cold, and undeniable. I didn't just read the words, I devoured them. My father's signature, bold and slanted, was a direct command from the grave. He knew. Even back then, he must have seen the rot in Dominic's ambition and the poison in Vivian's smile. But a piece of paper in the hands of a man who smelled like a scrapyard was just a scrap of paper. I needed a suit that cost more than my truck and a bank account that could make a senator pick up the phone. I didn't rush out to the press. Instead, I spent the next 18 months becoming a ghost in the financial world. I leveraged the ghost will at a private high-stakes boutique firm that didn't ask questions if you had the right collateral. They saw the seal, they saw my eye for assets, and they opened doors I shouldn't have been able to knock on. I stopped digging through dumpsters and started digging through corporate filings. Using my gift, I could look at a failing tech startup or a distressed shipping company and see exactly which patent was worth billions and which was just a tax write-off. My vision didn't just identify antiques anymore, it identified opportunity. I created a shell company, Apex Salvage Holdings. To the world, it looked like a waste management firm. To me, it was the spear I was aiming at Dominic's heart. The day I decided to step into the light, I chose a high-end charity auction in Manhattan. It was the kind of event where Vivian would be preening in the front row showing off the diamonds she bought with my inheritance. I walked into the ballroom wearing a tailored navy suit that hid the scars on my arms. My hair was cut sharp, my beard groomed into a look of rugged billionaire. I wasn't Ethan anymore, the soft, broken boy they'd pushed into the rain. I was Cole, the titan of industry that no one could place. The auctioneer stepped up to the podium. Our next item is a rare piece of American history, the original architect's sketches for the mid-century expansion of the Chicago waterfront, donated by the Sterling Vance Group. I felt a surge of cold fury. They were selling my father's personal archives. They were selling my childhood memories as a tax deduction. Dominic stood up looking smug in a tuxedo that probably cost more than my first warehouse. He took the stage playing the part of the grieving noble heir. My late brother Ethan loved these sketches. He lied, his voice dripping with fake sentiment. He'd want them to fund a better future. The bidding started at $50,000. I let it climb. I waited until the room went quiet at $200,000. $500,000. I said, my voice cutting through the air like a blade. The room went silent. necks craned to see who the newcomer was. Dominic squinted, trying to find a trace of familiarity in my face, but his ego was too big to let him see the junk man he'd murdered. He just saw a rival. 600. Dominic countered, his face reddening. He didn't want the sketches. He just didn't want to lose. 1,000,000, I replied without blinking. The gavel dropped. I didn't just buy the sketches. I bought the room's attention. After the session, I found myself standing at the bar, a glass of neat bourbon in my hand. I felt a presence beside me. That perfume-cloying, expensive jasmine. Vivian. That was a very aggressive move, mister. She purred, her eyes scanning me for a wedding ring or a weakness. Cole, I said, turning to face her. Up close, the lines of greed around her eyes were as clear to me as the value tags on the furniture. I just have a talent for recognizing when something is being undervalued. Your stepson would have agreed, wouldn't he? Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. A shadow of confusion, maybe a flicker of terror, passed through her eyes. You knew Ethan. I know everything about what he left behind, I said, leaning in just close enough for her to feel the coldness of my stare. And I know that some things stay buried, Vivian, but the best treasures, they eventually find their way back to the surface. Dominic joined her, his hand possessively on her shoulder. Is there a problem here? I looked him dead in the eye, the same eyes that watched me die in a Chicago alley. And I didn't feel fear. I felt the weight of the ghost will in my pocket and the power of my bank account. I realized I didn't just want my money back. I wanted to see them realize that the garbage they threw away was now the man who held their entire world in his hands. The silence that followed my words at that bar was heavier than any scrap metal I'd ever hauled. Dominic's eyes narrowed, searching my face for a ghost he was certain he'd exorcised years ago. I didn't give him the satisfaction of a flinch. I just finished my bourbon, the burn in my throat a welcome reminder that I was very much alive, and walked out into the crisp Manhattan night. The trap wasn't just set. The jaws were already closing. Over the next 72 hours, the Sterling Vance Group began to bleed. Using the liquidity from my salvage empire, I didn't just buy their stock. I bought their soul. I moved through the dark pools of the market, snapping up their distressed debt, the gambling markers Dominic had hidden, and the predatory loans Vivian had taken out to maintain her gala lifestyle. By Thursday morning, I didn't just own a seat at their table. I owned the table, the chairs, and the building they sat in. The final confrontation didn't happen in an alleyway. It happened in the 50th floor boardroom. Security works for me now, Dominic, I said, my voice calm, conversational. And so do you. I slid a leather folder across the mahogany surface. Inside wasn't just the ghost will. It was a forensic trail of every pill they'd bought to sedate me, every wire transfer they'd used to bribe the doctors who declared me unfit, and a high-resolution photo of a black SUV in a Chicago alley on a rainy night in 2024. The police are downstairs, not for a problem child with a needle in his arm, but for two murderers who committed federal securities fraud to cover up a homicide. As they were let out in handcuffs, the screaming and the pleading echoed down the hallway until the heavy glass doors swung shut. Silence returned to the room. I pulled out my phone, opened the camera, and looked at the thousands of people who had been following my anonymous story of survival. I told you guys that some things stay buried, I said to the lens. Your value isn't what they say it is. It's what you decide to build from the pieces they left behind. I hit end stream and walked out of the office. I didn't take the limo waiting downstairs. I walked down the street, breathed in the city air, and for the first time in 2 lives, I didn't look back.